Hi everyone, Chris here, and welcome to our series At the Movies. Except we're not at the movies, we're at home. Because let's be honest, if you're anything like me, there are days where you just don't want to go out after you've come home from work. And so you'd rather flop on the couch and tune on Netflix or tune on Stan and just sit back and unwind. And here's something you need to know about me. I'm a massive Ryan Reynolds fan. In fact, his film, Just Friends, I think is one of the greatest and most underrated Christmas movies of all time. And in this episode, we're gonna look at one of the new blockbuster movies by Ryan Reynolds, Free Guy. And by the end of this episode, we're gonna ask a question that you've probably asked in your life and that so many people around the world have asked in their life. Does God have a plan for my life? So stick around, because we're gonna talk about it. Now, right off the bat with this movie, parents, I need to let you know that this might be a movie that you're going to want to check out yourself before or if you ever let your children watch this movie. But the movie itself focuses around the main character, Guy. And Guy actually lives in Free City, hence the title of the movie, Free Guy. And Guy's a bank teller in this city, and his best mate, Buddy, is actually the security guard at the bank. And there's this scene in the movie where Buddy and Guy are sitting on the beach looking out at the ocean, and Guy asks this question that maybe you've asked yourself. Do you ever think there's more? And it's in asking this question that it leads Guy on a series of adventures to actually discover that Free City is actually a video game. That all of his decisions up until this point in his life have been pre-programmed. And now it's up to Guy to decide, much like it's up to us to decide, are we going to live life this way or are we going to search for more? Perhaps there's been a point in your life where you've got to a similar point to Guy, and it's caused you to ask that question, that same question that Guy did. Does God have a plan for my life? And maybe for you, you're kind of like, well, I don't know if God does. I'm not sure if I can see it. And maybe one of the reasons that you struggle to see that is because at the moment, the way things are going, maybe relationally or financially, maybe at work, it doesn't look like God has a plan. And maybe for you, you're watching this video and your life couldn't seem anything further from the fact that God has a plan. And I want to let you know it's completely natural to push back against this idea of God having a plan for our life. In fact, I think there's a few categories that we can all fit into when we're pushing back against this idea. The first category is, well, I don't know the plan. And I'll be honest, this is the category I find myself in more times than I'd care to admit. If you're a type A person like me, there's always this desire to be in control. And sometimes when I don't feel like I have control of my life or a particular situation, it causes me to ask that question like, well, God, do you have a plan? Because I don't know the plan. I'm not sure what the plan is consisting of. Others of you might say, I don't believe that there is a plan. Maybe you're a skeptic. Maybe you're not even sure that God exists. Maybe you don't believe that God exists at all. And so what you do is you look out at the world and you see some of the things and the events that are happening around our world right now. And you just say, well, with all this in mind, Chris, how could I believe that there's a plan with all this stuff going on? Then there are some of you who might say, Chris, I missed the plan. Maybe there was a point where you were going to church, or maybe you were exploring faith or exploring God, and then for whatever reason you kind of put it on the back burner. And now you're wondering, like, I don't know if I came back, if God would be interested. I don't know if God would want to have me back. Chris, I think I missed the opportunity to get in on the plan. And then the final group, or the final category, I would say, maybe you're someone who says, I messed up the plan. Chris, I believe that there's a God or that there's something more to this life, but I know I messed it up. There's some decisions I made when I was younger. There's some decisions I made financially or relationally, and I just feel like I messed up the plan. I feel like there was a plan, but now whatever plan is left, it's all sorts of messed up. And regardless of what category you kind of put yourself in at the moment, there's one thing that all those categories have in common that cause us to doubt. Interruptions. It's when an interruption comes into our life that we're forced to say, well, I don't know the plan. It's when an interruption comes into our life that we're forced to say, well, I think I might have messed up the plan. I think I might have missed the plan. You see, interruptions cause us to doubt that there is a plan or that God even has a plan. But here's what I want you to know. If your interruptions have caused you to doubt God, that's okay. See, when your plan gets interrupted, you can think that that's it for you. And you can actually become an extra in the game of life. I want to introduce you to something more powerful than a plan. And in order to do that, I want to introduce you to this person called Paul. Because Paul discovered this thing that is far bigger and far more impactful than a plan. Now, if you have no idea who Paul is, you need to know that Paul was someone who went through a whole bunch of interruptions in his life. In fact, these are just a few of the interruptions Paul went through. He'd been thrown in prison unjustly. He was flogged. He was whipped 39 times. He was beaten with rods 3 times. He was stoned so badly he nearly died. And if that wasn't enough, he was shipwrecked not once, not twice, but 3 times. And yet, despite all these interruptions that life threw at Paul, Paul never stopped feeling that there was something bigger for his life than a plan. And this is what Paul shares with us. He says, and we know that in all things God works. What Paul would say is that in my life, the source of my life is God working. Despite all the interruptions that I've faced, the source of my life remained God. It wasn't his paycheck, it wasn't his job, it wasn't his social standing. And if you imagine like that, if Paul were at the movies today with us and he were to ask, what is the source of your life? What is working in your life? How might you answer? Is it your money? Is it your relationship status? Is it the school you send your children to? Is it the school you go to? Is it the comments your boss makes? Is it something else entirely? And the reason that Paul would want to know what this is in our life is because of what he writes next. He says, God works for the good of those who love him. See, Paul knew that God was at work in his life, and that when God goes to work, God always works the situation for good. Now, this is really important because whether God is working for your good, it may not feel good. Just because there's interruptions in your life doesn't mean that God isn't working behind the scenes for your good. And then Paul lets us know, right? Because Paul's experienced not good situations all the time. Paul lets us know how he was able to endure this. He says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Paul would say, I'm able to stand before you with the interruptions I've faced. And the reason I know that God is at work despite it all is not because God has a plan, but because God has a purpose for my life. So my question for you is this: would you rather live life according to the plan, or would you rather say you live a life full of purpose? See, what Paul is trying to help us grasp here is that God has something better for your life than a plan. God actually has a purpose for your life. And what that means is that even if the plan is messed up, the purpose is still at work. Even if you're not sure of the plan, the purpose is still at work. Even if you took a few wrong turns along the way, the purpose is still something that you can hold onto. And then Paul finishes up by speaking directly to followers of Jesus when he writes this. For those who God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. See, Paul knew that in this life, he could take interruptions. And because he was able to take interruptions, that other followers of Jesus could take those interruptions as well. Because God takes those interruptions and uses to conform us, uses us to make us more like Jesus. You see, what we see is something that throws us out of the plan, or something that throws the plan out, messes up the plan, or makes it feel as if we don't know what the plan is. God uses for his purpose. And so what I would say for you is, when life interrupts the plan, look for God's purpose. And it's in that idea that we can begin to discover how we can apply this to our lives. As you look at the interruptions in your life and as you're thinking through them right now, I know it's so tempting to see your interruptions as something that mess up the plan. But this week, here's what I want you to do. I want you to see your interruptions as an opportunity. If you're not a follower of Jesus, maybe you can start to see the interruption as a way to answer the question, like, what is my purpose in life? How is this interruption pointing me to a bigger purpose? But if you are a Jesus follower, maybe when an interruption comes your way, you can use it to say, what is God trying to teach me about my purpose through this interruption? How is God, through this interruption, trying to mold me and conform me to become more and more like Jesus every single day? See, in the movie, Guy just sticks to a plan. And it's actually the plan that frustrates Guy. He just got up and did the same thing over and over and over again. But it was only when the plan got messed up that Guy was able to see the bigger purpose that was in store for his life. And it's only through our interruptions that sometimes we have the opportunity to see the bigger purpose that God has for our lives as well. This week, I want you to be a little bit more like Guy and a little bit more like Paul and view your interruption as an opportunity. You might just be surprised at how God uses your interruption to point you to your purpose.